numerology was a study that once we started to develop language and we had an easier way to communicate with words, it was a way of keeping us connected to the original system of the divine, that the divine had a story for us and we were fulfilling it here. And it was an archetypal story. So there were certain archetypes that we would move through in our evolution, in our awakening. And so numerology is the source code of our awakening. It tells us the order of events, what lessons we'll move through. So when we look back to the original language and the original interpretations we had, Sanskrit, you name it, we're looking at the beginnings of numerology.
I'd like to welcome back to the show returning champion, Joy Kingsborough. How you doing, Joy?
Oh, I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much for having me back and in person.
Yes.
It's an incredible set.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. The energy is going to be a little different than our Zoom.
Yeah.
It's going to, you can feel the vibe a little bit differently than you do on Zoom. But yeah, I appreciate having you here. And well, before we get started, congratulations on marrying a friend of ours.
Yes.
Mr. Matt Kahn. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute, the love of my life, exploding in person, being able to have this experience and with someone who I get to work with and connect with. It's been incredible.
It's pretty awesome. And you know, we were talking about channeling, and you're obviously a channel of Jonah. And you told me that Matt channels, and we had just had a long conversation about his channeling journey, and he really never spoke about it before. Our last conversation, we talked a lot about how you got your start with channeling and all of that stuff. But it's amazing how these two souls who do similar things, it's kind of like a match made in heaven, almost in a sense. Like now you're like a power couple.
Yeah.
Like
Who knew?
Who knew? You're like a spiritual power couple now. Like I don't know of any other two a couple that are same but very different,
right?
In the way you approach the work.
Yeah.
So how did you like when I just have to ask because I've never spoken to someone who has their significant other. So like my wife, not a channel, at all. How did you balance it? Like because it's being someone who's that connected to spirit, it can be heavy.
Yeah.
It can be difficult to navigate life. And a lot of times the balancing aspect of that is someone else who is not in that world to balance your energy. Now, I know you guys are very different energies. There's no question about that. Yeah. But how do you guys kind of deal with both of you being connected to source in the ways that you are?
Yeah, it was really interesting because, well, I mean, number one, I never expected that. Okay. I mean, who
does that?
I think I had to suspend all of, and I know he talks about this too, I had to suspend my list of what I thought was possible.
Right.
And the idea of meeting someone who not only understood what you were doing, but lived it. Right, was living that story that we would, in the beginning when we met, we would talk about how, when I was 5, I experienced this. When I was 10, I experienced this. And we had so many of these similarities where we had been pulled by the divine, by source, by God. This pull that was bigger than our lives. We could feel that from a very early age. And so we know that we were brought together to have that experience. We just didn't know someone else had that. Right, we'd met a lot of other people who have done this work, and it kind of surprises them out of the blue. And it's always been in us. It was something we were born, I think, connected, awake, curious, leaning into that world.
Let me ask you, what do you think the biggest misconception is from people who do the kind of work that you and Matt, and arguably an extension me, by interviewing people like yourself? What's the biggest misconception you think people have about deeply spiritual people or channels or psychics or anybody that deals in this kind of space?
Well, I can tell you from previous dates, the first question was, can you read my mind? Do you know what I'm thinking? Do you know what I'm saying? There was this fear of the vulnerability.
Really?
Yeah. Do you know that I'm not being truthful and transparent was sort of the sense that I got, right? It immediately calls someone to be honest. right? When somebody meets someone who does this kind of work, I think there's this, I've got to pretend to be something, or I've got to put on a facade, and you feel a lot of that doing this work. And I think that's why it was such a mind-blowing experience to meet someone who wasn't hiding behind something.
Oh yeah, I know the feeling.
Right.
Yeah, when I met my wife, there's the same thing. She was as authentic as you could be.
Just us.
And that's when you don't play those games, life becomes a lot easier that way. And it's rare though. It's extremely rare. But I could imagine, like, early on in my early years, in my early 20s, if I would have met a channel or a psychic and they would have said it in our first date, I'd be like, well, do you know what I'm thinking? Do you know? Like it pretty much exposes the fear that you have.
And then there's this specialness that they put upon you. Right. So they think because you're channeling,
yes,
right?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Now any experience they have, they're like, oh, but you know that, or you understand. Like now you don't have this real conversation. Right. And I think both of us were used to that when we met, used to that, like people treated us a little bit differently. And so when we came together and we'd share our experiences and we could just be us and just talk about food, we could just cook something together. We could just go for a good meal or a walk. Even at when we first met, we were surrounded by all of these incredibly, spiritual people in this world. And we just went for a walk, right? Wow. So how do we ground? How do we balance it? We do it with nature and creativity and connection and great conversation that isn't about channeling.
No, so it's like, oh, that was a great Parmesan. Did your spirit guides tell you how to do that?
Well, Matt would say yes.
Yes, obviously, Matt would say yes.
Yes,
of course. Yeah, they have great recipes on the other side.
Absolutely.
But I imagine that would be what would happen is everything. I guess you would. I mean, obviously, I've spoken to so many people in this space now that I won't put them. I don't put anybody on a pedestal. It doesn't make any sense to me. Because I always look at what you do, what all of us do at the different stages that we're at. We're examples of what could be. We all have this ability.
Yeah.
We all have this ability to connect to source. It's truly about where we are on the journey. That's all it is.
Absolutely.
From Jesus to Buddha to Joy to Matt to Alex, we all have different stages that we show. Like, no, there's some other ability. There's an example.
Yeah.
For all of us to go. But I can see how people would automatically, oh, you're special.
Right.
And one thing I wanted to ask you as a channel, and when you came out as a channel, when people started treating you differently, that's a straight up ego trap.
Yes.
It is an ego trap. Very much like, I come from Hollywood. I've dealt with many actors.
Yep.
And when they say, you're the best, you're the greatest, you're this, you're that, you start believing you drink the Kool-Aid.
Right.
How did you deal with that as you were kind of coming out into this world and people start treating you differently? That takes a strong understanding of who you are and a center for you to kind of just go, eh. And even with, there's, I'm sure, moments of weakness, like maybe I am. No, I'm not.
Right.
We're human. That's part of our journey. So how did you deal with it?
Well, and I think because there's a balance of you want to be confident and you're developing your confidence. It's one of the things we're all developing in this space, right? So how do I show up confidently, but not better than others? And so that's part of the, I think the spiritual journey that we're on as channels or as intuitives and as humans is you move through these same series of lessons, this journey. And I think the ego is part of that, obviously, but the ego really helps us those moments of, I remember on stage and having people come for the first time afterwards and say, can you sign your book? Can you, wanting to talk to me and all these, and all of those, I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even want you to read the book. Like I wrote it and I wanted to get the message out, but I didn't want anybody to know who I was, so I was balancing a lot of that. My ego wanted me to be very small. And so I was always fighting against the, I think, I was told as a child, nobody wants to hear that. I had a lot of that messaging. And my father wanted a boy, didn't want a girl. And so I had this sense of women were, they were less, second class, they were less than. And so I really wanted to fall in love. I wanted people to like me. And so I wanted to be demure. I wanted to be whatever people wanted me to be is what I wanted growing up. And so when I started to come onto this journey and awaken to my own sense of self, my own sense of self-love and integrity, I needed to balance the integrity of are you really doing a good job? Are you helping people? Are you really showing up for that purpose? And so I would double, triple, quadruple check myself every time I channeled. Like, was there any amount of ego that came in? And if somebody said, you're doing a great job, I'd be like, oh, they're just trying to be nice to me.
Yeah.
Right. And so it took me a while to be able to really hear the feedback and go, you know what? They're right. I'm helping people.
And, I think there's a difference between celebrity, which is something I've been around a lot in my life, not me being a celebrity, but being around it, and the work that you do in an extension with what I do on the show, where we're changing people's lives with the work that we're doing. And my experience is when people do recognize me, it's not about sometimes it's about the fame aspect of things, which I always find strange, but more so you've no idea you've changed my life.
Right.
That's a whole other level of an ego trap, but also just to deal with that kind of energy and information. I'm sure you and Matt and many of my guests who are doing this kind of work, to process that is a lot, because it's one thing to talk into a microphone and you're in a little room and there's nobody here but you and me.
Right.
And you're just putting stuff out, or you write a book and you're alone and you just put it out there. But someone reads this, someone watches this, and it really changes the trajectory of their path.
Right.
That's a tremendous responsibility. And if you start to really get your head around that, you'll never get out of the house.
Right.
How did you deal with that?
Yeah. In the very beginning, I was doing readings. So I started off, I would, do a card reading or a numerology reading, or, I started in that space, and I would, wanted to be very clear about what I was doing. So I'd always check and do the math and make sure that what I was hearing was absolutely perfect. And one day I realized that it was slowing me down, and it was I was watching my step too carefully. And as a result, I wasn't helping people the way that I could. I started to filter messages. I wanted to do such a good job, and I didn't want to hurt people, that if something would come through, I would say, oh, I don't want to tell them that. I don't know if they can. I would start to question whether or not they could hear that. So for me, it was a bit of a journey through I don't want to hurt anyone. And I had this conversation with my guide, as Jonah was coming through, and just said, I want to do this work, and I surrender and I say yes to it. Please help me let go of any need to measure by the quality of experience that I think they're taking in that moment. I had to see it from a bigger game, that I was really here to be a ripple of change in their life, and I might not get to see it in that moment. I might not get the ego feedback of, oh my gosh, you're amazing.
Right.
I might not get that moment. I might tell them something they don't like. And so I just surrendered and said, I don't care. I don't care if I'm right. I don't care what, I'm just going to let you speak through me, and I'm going to see where this goes. And that was a turning point moment for me, where I went from doing readings that were really planned out to just jumping on a call with a client or in a session and just letting it go, just letting whatever wanted to come through. And it was pretty rapid for me. Like, from that transition, I could tell I felt so good when I did it. And when I held back, I didn't feel as good. But so I could feel God moving through. And that became the experience you can't deny.
And the thing is, you don't know what you might say or do that means nothing to you, irrelevant to you, can change someone's entire life because it's a brand new explosion in their mind.
Yeah.
When I talk about the Council of Nicaea, I'm like, this was built by the Bible was written by Constantine and all this kind of stuff. And they're just like, what?
Right.
There's a lot of what's going on, and then that goes down a certain passage. But to me and you, of course.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course. I've been there, done that.
Right.
But to someone who'd never heard that concept, and they hold on to that book, again, no judgment, as, oh, this is the word of God. I'm like, well, it could have been, but the purpose of it was this historically.
Right.
And then there's translations and all the other stuff that goes along with it. But it's a very humbling thing, the stuff that gets done, the work that we do.
Yeah.
And I like the way you said, you were hoping, you wanted to do so good that you were like, I want to see your life change now for my sake.
Right.
So I can go home and sleep tonight, until you're like, no, I just have to let it out there, and whatever happens, happens. And there might be a seed that flourishes 10 years from now.
Right. And I've had such amazing experiences of that. So I think over time, I let go. And about 5 years in, I started to see that ripple. Years later, people would come back and they'd want another reading, or they'd tell me what happened. And I remember working with a client who was very sick, and she later died of cancer. But working with her, it was such an incredible experience because I was able to watch how the work really helped her. I gave her, not me, but the experience we had together created a sense of peace for her. So it was the first time I really saw, I don't think that this work is going to help her heal herself. I don't think that it's going to change the outcome that she's experiencing, but she's going to leave better off for the journey we've had. And so I worked with her for quite some time. And as she was coming closer to her death, it was about 10 years later, she flew out to where I lived and said, I want to take you to dinner. You're someone who means so much to me. The journey that we had together in this lifetime touched me in a way that prepared me for what's next. And I just want to thank you. And so she came out, she took me and my mom to dinner. And it was those experiences where I started to measure that. Like, I don't need people to get the perfect outcome. I don't need me to be known. I just want to be a part of what makes this world better.
Can I share a story with you?
Yeah.
So recently, I was talking to my mom, and who's a big fan of the show. Hi, Mom. And she was, and she has all her neighbors listening, and she lives in a retirement community, and she told me about this gentleman who lived downstairs from her, and said, hey, this man, he is a huge fan of yours. He says, next time you're in Florida, please come and visit. And I'm like, cool, no problem. He's like, but he's dying. I'm like, oh, wow. Like, it's like they say he has a few months left, but he doesn't know it yet. The wife doesn't want to kind of tell him. He knows he's sick, but didn't know the extent of it. And I said to her, do you want me to talk to him? He's like, oh my God, that would make his day. I'm like, of course. Let me see what I could, please call me in 10 minutes. So I got on the phone with this gentleman, and he lit up like it was the 4th of July. Yeah. He was so happy. We spoke for half an hour. He's telling me, I am no longer afraid of dying because of your show. Oh. And I've been watching all these near-death experiences and the spiritual, I watch it daily, and it has helped me with this transition that I'm going to go down. He was very understanding. He knew where he was going. He goes, I want to thank you so much. And then, we finished our conversation. We hung up, and my mom told me that he was that his wife told her that he was on cloud 9 for about another week or two. Oh. He was eating, he was happy. He had and I was like, wow, the power. And he passed, unfortunately passed about a month or two later. But to know that this little show did that for another human being, for another soul, it's heavy. Right. It's heavy. And I'm so glad it's the purpose of this. Right. It's not just for growth. It's also for anything it needs to be. Yeah. But it was heavy. It took me a minute to process that. Yeah. It really did. So I completely understand what you're saying.
Yeah. But when we, as we string those moments together, it's not just the tragedy. You get to be a part of people's extraordinary breakthroughs and when they discover their own light. And there's so many of these moments that's become the measurement of, was I a part of something like that? Not did I do that? Not how much money did I make? Not how many clients did I have a day? It's how was I remembered for what I came here to do?
I've always fascinated about numerology. I've never had anybody on the show to talk to me about numerology. Yeah. I am aware of it. I understand just enough to be dangerous. Yeah. Can you explain to me what numerology is? And then we'll go deeper down because that's a pretty deep rabbit hole.
It's a pretty big rabbit hole. And for me, I think the simplest way that I look at it is numerology is a language. And it is a way of communicating with the divine. It's the very first language. So we began language with geometry. So it started off with geometric shapes that would speak to people. Right. So we see this in cave drawings. Everything was very abstract and geometric. It was round. It wasn't square, right? We hadn't gotten to a linear idea first. First, it was this geometry. But in that, the conversations were certain shapes we felt things with. So everything was a way of interpreting our feeling state, interpreting what was happening in this consciousness, which then became characters, which became numbers, which then became letters. So numerology was a study that once we started to develop language and we had an easier way to communicate with words, it was a way of keeping us connected to the original system of the divine, that the divine had a story for us and we were fulfilling it here. And it was an archetypal story. So there were certain archetypes that we would move through in our evolution, in our awakening. And so numerology is the source code of our awakening. It tells us the order of events, what lessons we'll move through. So when we look back to the original language and the original interpretations we had, Sanskrit, you name it, we're looking at the beginnings of numerology. We're looking at the beginnings of this shape means this. But it's the core of the traditional meanings long before they were changed by political and religious figures. So they're the original meanings. So this was stored. The Egyptians actually stored this in a system that was 52 different archetypes. We know those 52 archetypes now as poker cards, but this was the original system of numerology. It was never created as a game. It was 52 different archetypes to represent 52 different weeks that was happening in a particular order in order to awaken every human to 4 really important fundamental aspects of our life. And that was development of the heart, development of the mind, development of the material world engagement, and the development of spirituality.
And what are those? What are the suits?
So the hearts, the clubs, the diamonds, the spades.
So what? So in that order?
In that order. So we have the heart, the development of the heart, right? And remembering who we are from the divine. Then we have the clubs of the mind. So these are all things related to mental processing and thought, important part of the journey. And then we have diamonds, which is the physical world, which is now we're going to separate ourselves. We have even the edges of the shape are a way of separating, seeing the things that are separate from us. But then the spiritual spade is actually a drawing of all of the suits that are now coming together looking up to the divine. So it's everything is now let's look at it from a bigger picture.
And when you say archetypes, me coming from Hollywood and storytelling, the archetype in the hero's journey.
Right.
There are a bunch of archetypes of the court jester, the trickster, the hero, the villain, all of these kind of things. Is that similar in that sense?
It's what was before the hero's journey.
Of course.
Right? So all of that, tarot cards come out of that, astrology comes out of that, the hero's journey, how film is developed, all of these things come back to a natural psychological structure. So we all have a way of moving conscious thought into new ideas. It's not different for any human. It's been known since the beginning of time. The Essenes knew it. They wrote it in their texts. It's written in the Emerald Tablets. They talk about communicating with consciousness and the evolution of that. This isn't a new idea. We've just tried to outthink it. Right?
Yes, with our ego minds.
Yeah, absolutely.
With our ego minds.
Yeah.
So that's why a lot of these ancient sites around the world, like the pyramids and things like that, it's all about numbers.
Completely.
It's all about not only geometry, but about math, about what these numbers mean, the height of this, the width of that is according to astrology and where the planets are. It's all math.
Right.
It's all numbers.
It's all math in order to leverage an understanding of how frequency is moving through the entire planet. So every mathematical combination, every number is associated with a feeling, which is associated with a frequency, which has a particular experience in the world. It engages with the world in a particular way. So when you're in the pyramid, you have a room that is a very specific shape and size. It's very specific, so specific that it doesn't matter if you have a good singing voice or not. I do not. This will be really clear. But when you're in the chamber and you start chanting, your voice matches the perfect pitch that room is designed for. It is cultivating a frequency.
What is the frequency of that room?
I don't know the specific frequency of it, but if you were to take like the 528 frequency or somewhere around in there, that's what it feels like to me when I'm there. And so
isn't one of those frequencies, I'm not familiar, I know, again, enough to be dangerous, those frequencies are like the heart frequency or the mind frequency. There are frequencies that you can measure.
Yep.
Is that what some of those, like that room is connecting to one of those things?
Yeah.
Or no, actually what I heard was it was the Earth's frequency.
Yeah. I think it's a combination of things. So I think something that's difficult in this conversation is that you have a frequency when you're there. So you're bringing a frequency into that room and you have to account for that. So I think this is why the feeling we're having is based on who we are, which our home frequency is love. But we also align with the Earth. And as we come together and we're in harmony with the Earth, we create a sound together, which then amplifies not only what's happening in the pyramid, cultivating the energy of the Earth, which, I think this was largely used for some sort of electrical communication, some sort of communication device, because you can feel it. It's amplifying sound, which to me is an antenna. And I think a lot of other people have felt the same thing. I've had conversations with people who study this who are like, this was communication. But you sit in there and you feel it. I chanted. I've got a video on my YouTube where I chant in the King's Chamber. And it's me and one other person, and it sounds like I'm with an entire orchestra chanting.
Wow.
That's how magnified that space is. And the King's Chamber isn't that big.
No.
This is not a big room. So
that's really fascinating.
It's designed specifically to amplify.
It was just all done haphazardly by a bunch of slaves.
So random.
It took them like 30, 40 years to put it together. Yeah, it's real simple. Yeah. There's no reason for any of it.
Right.
It's obviously where they buried people.
Clearly.
Even
though we've never found a mummy in any of them.
No, or any hieroglyphs, because the Egyptians were known to talk about everything they ever did. Right. But in there, no hieroglyphs.
Right.
So it was fascinating. Yeah. So going back to numerology, okay, so that's the basis of it. So how do you use it in your life? What do you do with it? Like readings, things like that. When you were talking, I was like, oh, that sounds a lot like the I Ching or a version of the I Ching. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, they're all, if you really go further back, and this is what I love going back to, well, what was the core around the world? We had Mayan numerology. There's the I Ching. There's tarot. There's even the Gypsy tarot. There's all these different things that emerged all over the world. Mm-hmm. And when we go back to the core of it, we really see that there was some sort of conversation that was being had with leaders all over the world. And it was either intuitive or channeled, where they were picking up on what the meanings of different shapes were, and then they created systems, right? But for me, when I look at numerology, and I think it's probably the same for I Ching and some of these other systems, these systems are so intricate and so precise. I don't know who could have invented numerology, at least the original system. Even when we look at how Pythagoras over time sort of distorted the system and lightened it, like there's a lightening of that information, which I think is more the mainstream numerology, is sort of this anecdotal, oh, you're this life path and it means this, and it's gotten really light. The traditional system is very specific. And there's no deviation. It is, you were born at this moment, which means you were born at this place in the sky, which means you were born for this reason, and these are the people you'll meet. And this was your purpose. This is the mental, emotional, and physical patterns you'll deal with in your life. So all that ego patterning, numerology breaks down every single ego pattern you'll ever break through. And when you do, it walks you through how to be karma-free. So it's literally giving you the pathway, the flashlight we were talking about. It gives you the flashlight in the tunnel that says, if you go this way and if you lean into this growth pattern. My example was my mind was navigating a pattern of loss. So my thinking pattern was I was always less than, I was always going to lose something. I always needed to make sure I didn't, I needed to make everybody happy so that people wouldn't leave me. Well, that's my main mental chart for karma that I needed to move through, was being okay that they did, right? So breaking through that, it's written in my chart. I didn't know that until after I had moved through that lesson. But we have 13 of these patterns. And when we know what they are, we can lean into them rather than hide from them or try to overcome them or control them. We can actually just lean in and go, okay, well, if this is my pattern, then how do I unwind that and really trust or develop my integrity or develop my discernment? And it walks you through, everybody walks through the same lessons, just in a different way.
So when you're getting a tarot reading, which is a whole other conversation for another day, but that the tarot cards, each one of those cards represents an archetype.
Correct.
That you can, not everyone's going to go through all of them,
right?
But you can. That's going to be happening on your path right now. You're like, oh, you're going to find your true love. Your true love's on the way, or oh, death. Oh, someone's going to die. Watch out, or something along those lines, or wealth, or something along those lines. So basically, numerology is giving you a roadmap to your, not only your future, but also your past, and what you're supposed to do in this life.
In this life, and what you can learn from other lives in this moment. And it's precise. So tarot came out of numerology. That was an evolved system. And you can use playing cards that way. People, I mean, I can use playing cards to give information. But really the core of it is there's one layout for everyone. And we're all on that layout. We're all like in this dance together. And when we know what that is, even if we are pulling cards or using that kind of system to get information, if we can match it back to our own story, it's even more profound because we can see what's really ours. We're not meant to play all of them.
Right.
Right.
It's exhausting.
And it's but we don't know. We haven't been given the flashlight. And so we're seeking. So when you were talking about seekers before, I think a lot of that seeking makes us more susceptible to the traps rather than going, wait a minute, this isn't a trap, this is a door.
Is what's in numerology kind of just in stone, or is it something that adjusts?
So I would say both. It's something that the moment you were born was set.
Yeah, I always call it like our soul plan. You know the soul plan, of course.
Yes.
That there's markers in the road on the highway.
Yeah.
Those markers don't move.
Yeah.
You're gonna meet. You and Matt are gonna meet at this time, and I'm gonna start a show at these giant moments that move your.
They're absolutely written.
They're gonna happen. You're gonna meet this person. You're gonna have this job. You're gonna. Period. How you get there is completely up to you. Is that kind of the way it is?
Absolutely. And the experience you're going to have, what you've created that makes it so that you have a lower experience or a more dense experience, a more painful experience with it, right? Or if you have a higher experience where I think, there's versions where Matt and I could have met and we maybe weren't ready or
20 years ago, if you would have met, what would have happened?
Well, we either would have completely not liked each other or we would have had 42 children. We're not quite sure which one it is.
It's one or the other, right?
One or the other. Right? Yeah. But you meet at the moments that you need to meet. But what you've created, that you are creating certain experiences. And that's even a tricky word because you're not creating, you're just walking a path. And you're part of the co-creation of it. You're part of the landscape, kind of like going to the King's Chamber, and your frequency is a part of that moment, creating something that the universe is wanting to experience through you, or God wants to experience through you.
And how you walk with the frequency, let's say, or the energy or the attitude that you walk into that environment will determine your experience.
Right.
Because a lot of times, I always tell my children this, and I don't adhere to it all the time.
Yeah.
But you have no control of what life throws at you.
Right.
But only thing you control is how you deal with it.
Yeah.
How you process it. That's the only thing you have real control over. You have a car accident. It could be the worst day of your life. It could be the best day of your life. You could have met your wife that day or your husband that day. It could have been a million reasons. So it's all about how you process and deal with what has been thrown at you. That you have complete control over.
And how much you're able to really see it and observe. Because if you can't observe...
And you're in it.
Right, you're so in it, then it's almost, you can't help that either. Mm-hmm. Right? But the more we become aware, so we go through this process of constant awakening, where we become more aware of something and more aware of something and more aware of something, and we're actually just able to see more possibilities. And then we can take those paths. Where it was the same, it's the consciousness we meet a moment in determines the experience.
When you're born, you have a set number, right? Let's say that's our date. the date of the calendar that we've created at this point in time. Not the Mayan calendar, but our calendar.
Right.
So those numbers are set in stone. So like, if you're born a Sagittarius, you're a Sagittarius. That's what the cards that you dealt were dealt at that point in time. How does this connect? How does numerology connect to astrology? Which I've just recently discovered about. I mean, I've known about it, but I actually had someone on who's an expert in it and goes deep into the history of astrology, like you did with numerology.
Yeah,
you go far, far, far back, and then you start, and then we talked about the science of it, the physics of it, and like there's not the woo-woo of it.
No, it's real.
What that is, like, oh well, the moon actually has an effect on the planet, the tides.
Yes.
So if the moon has an effect on the planet, it might actually affect us that we're 90% water.
Right.
There's that. And I never knew this, but lunatic
is from the moon.
Comes from lunar, the moon. Because at certain times, full moon tonight.
Right.
People start going a little nutty.
Yeah. Well, I think, when you start to trace these things back, you see almost everything connects back to its astrological and numerological roots. And it's the same thing. There's all kinds of stories of things that were stolen out of these temples in Egypt and all over the world. They were all astrological sites. They were all places where they were mapping the moon system and the stars and the planets they knew about before we discovered them.
Of course, obviously. Remembered them.
Right. But the numerology is the frequency foundation of it all. And they're linked, right? The astrology is another way of telling the story of how those frequencies communicate with us, that we have a home place that we were born from. There's a moment where whatever the alignment was, whatever the feeling was in the world, right? Some of us love summer, some of us love winter. There are certain feelings that every day has. That feeling is a part of our frequency. So we're born with it. It's not that we are that. It's not like if you were born a Gemini or a Sagittarius that you have
to do all those traits.
Right. It means that you were born under that frequency. And that frequency is going to feel familiar. And so familiarity means that we want to do that. Those are things that we love. So then we can predict the traits that we like because we're familiar creatures. We want that familiarity.
It's interesting because throughout my life, I would meet people and I'd go, man, I feel comfortable with you.
Right.
I go, are you a Cancer? And I go, yeah. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
You could smell it.
Right.
You can I can smell a Cancer coming from a mile away.
Right.
And like they just have these certain things. They're not all the same, but there's just something about them that there's an energy to them, and you just kind of feel it.
Yeah.
Kind of like when and then when you're like, if your nemesis is Sagittarius, then you're like, oh, I can't, right? Or if it's a Leo or if it's a Taurus, and you're like, oh God, they just don't mix.
Right.
You feel those as well. But before I believed in any of this, I always was like, well, Cancer. Okay, that makes kind of sense. And then I would read the traits. I'm like, yeah, well, I'll check that one. Yeah. And I would read the other ones. I'm like, no, not good with money. Nope.
Right.
Like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's pretty fascinating to think. And what do you say to people who just saying this is just insane? All of this stuff. Like, how can you work your life? I'm not talking about the horoscopes that you read in the newspaper. That's not what we're talking about here. But when you start guiding your life on numbers and if the planets are aligning, I mean, it sounds loony.
Absolutely.
It does sound loony.
Yeah.
As we're discussing it, it's becoming much more concrete to me, believe it or not, because it's coming from a base of a grounded historical place, mathematical place, physics place, scientific place. What do you say to people, which I'm sure run into you, not only about this, about everything else you do as well, but specifically about this kind of stuff? Like, this makes this is weird.
I don't defend it anymore. There was a time when it used to make me really uncomfortable.
Okay.
In fact, in the very beginning, when I started doing readings for people, I didn't tell them that's what I was doing. I would just say, I'm able to just be able to, lean into some characteristic traits. Would you mind? And I would just say some things. But now if somebody asks about it, I just say, you can think it's anecdotal, but there's some really uncanny things that are connected to this system. And there are reasons why we meet certain people. And just like you said, there are certain people we resonate with and some that we don't. And I'll sometimes share the story of being in Disneyland. I love Disneyland. I think it's magical. I'm still a kid. It's where I go back to being, my youngest, happiest version of me.
Absolutely.
Right? So, but in Disneyland, one of the things that I noticed, and I started noticing this everywhere in life, you're there with, 1 million people at Disneyland. There's all these, hundreds of thousands of people on any given day. And you'll walk around the park and you'll run into the same people over and over again.
Yes, and they're all in your line.
Right. And it's the same people with the 6 kids and the bubble machines. And they're not watching the kids and, all whatever it is, but you see the same people. And there's a reason for that. It goes back to the system of energetics and the grid. We have a frequency and an experience of who we are for a reason that's bigger than us. We are part of the magnetics of this planet. And so we are drawn to certain magnetic frequencies in order to fulfill our role. So it really, you start to notice it in life. You just are drawn to certain people. You end up with people who have similar experiences, not because you put an ad out and said, I have these experiences, call me if you're interested in these things. We just find each other. And it's really not as complicated as we're making it. We end up in the room with people, like out of all the 8 billion people, I meet the love of my life, and it's so extraordinary. That's magic by anybody's definition.
Well, I had Matt on the show, episode 16.
Right.
I was a newbie in this world.
Right.
I had never heard of Matt.
Right.
Ever.
Right.
And yet, he was one of the people put in front of me.
Right.
And I was like, oh, he seems like I think this will be good. Yeah. And we had lovely conversations. And it just was magical the way it is. Like I was telling him before, I'm dear friends with Daryl Anka, who channels Bashar. And I knew him as a filmmaker. 3 years I knew him. Never once mentioned he channeled.
Right.
It's never a conversation. How is it that human being, out of everybody in LA who could have worked with his movie, there's a couple people in LA could have done his movie, found me.
Right.
And then we did all that. And then I would start my show. I go, hey, you're a channel, right? Why don't you come on the show? He's like, all right, cool. I'll do it for you.
Right.
And it's fascinating how everything kind of
Right. It just
connects.
lines up. Thank goodness, because that's how the sun and the moon work. Thank goodness they just line up so that we don't freeze. Right?
So let me ask you, if you were going to do, so how does a numerology chart go? Like if you were going to do mine, I don't want you to tell my future, but in general, like if you were going to example it, how does that work?
It would depend on, so for me, context is everything. I think that when we look at these systems, they're so vast. We can look at anything. I'm not in the realm of predictive work. I'm not a fortune teller, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the worst uses of this, kind of like the traps. Mm-hmm. I think the best
lottery tickets, no.
Right? No lottery tickets. There's huge karmic, I think, retribution for that. But being able to look at and go, well, what is it that in your life is bringing you the most angst or curiosity? What are, you're got this business that you're unfolding. If we came into a conversation, I would say, what is it that you're not sure about as you're expanding your business? Is there something I can look at to help you see maybe some sort of blind spot? That's really what I'm obsessed with, is where is the blind spot? Where's the place that I can really take it to the next level of understanding myself or help you understand yourself so that you can get the most out of this life? You're going to do it anyway, but let's do it at the level that gives you the greatest feedback, excitement, joy, prosperity. Let's find that together. And that's what I'm looking for in the chart. Where's your key alignment for prosperity, love, health, well-being? That's what I'm diving into.
So you're going to walk into the snowstorm. Now, do you want to be in a 4-wheel drive or an 87 Pinto?
Or snowshoes.
That's once you get out of the car, do you want to be in Bermuda shorts and a Tommy Bahama?
Right.
Or would you like, a parka?
Right.
And snowshoes.
Because I think
because you're going in.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of realism to it, right? Like I'll look at my chart and I'll see some years it's like, oh, I've got to navigate this lesson. It has nothing to do with the things that I'm interested in. But I'm so grateful I know that.
Interesting.
Right. So I think that's where I usually approach it, is how can I help you get the most out of your life?
If you're enjoying this conversation, I invite you to go deeper down the rabbit hole with me on Next Level Soul TV. It's packed with exclusive content like live special guest Q&As, daily podcasts, commercial-free access to the entire Next Level Soul catalog, early access to episodes before they air, and special meditations you won't find anywhere else. We will be adding new exclusive content every month, plus you can connect with me during my monthly live streams. Just go to nextlevelsoul.com/subscribe and join our soulful community today. I'll see you on the inside. Well, I don't want to leave our conversation before I speak to Jonah.
Okay.
Jonah is, I love Jonah.
Yeah.
Last time he was here, he had a great conversation. So can you explain to the audience how you channel and what your process is in channeling?
Okay. So for me, I'm fairly conscious. I would call myself a conscious channel, but I do let go and I feel the difference between me and Jonah. So even though Jonah's here, has been here the whole conversation, Jonah sort of steps forward. I feel him come into this space just more than he was a moment ago. And Jonah will just share insights, wisdom. He's very direct. He's not so conversational. He'll just usually like come right in and just...
Not so much with the banter.
No, not so much.
Not so much with like, so did you see Raiders of the Lost Ark? I'm like, no, not at all.
Yeah, he's not as much fun on a date when Matt and I are out. Yeah.
I have to ask about that. How does that play into a relationship?
Yeah.
Meaning like Jonah coming in and like, imagine if Jonah came in and was like, Matt's not for you.
Right.
But you felt it. That would have been awkward. Yeah. I'm sure he didn't.
That would change things.
It would change things, right?
No.
But you felt it, and I'm sure Jonah showed up. He's like, he is the one.
Yeah. Well, I got lots of feedback. It's okay, because you're afraid.
You're
it's
terrified.
so fast.
I mean, yeah, you guys were like teenagers, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
Like a year later, you're married. After a weekend, we're like, it's you and me. You're my person. Let's go.
Right.
Like,
and you're like, have I lost my mind?
Is it?
Yeah.
Because you're like, I'm a rational woman.
Yeah.
I've lived life a little bit. I'm a mother. I've gone through some stuff.
Yeah.
What am I acting like a child? When you told me it, and when Matt now told me the whole story, I was like, good Lord.
Right.
I mean, I was fast too with my wife, and we moved pretty quickly. But it moved pretty quick.
Yeah. So there are a lot of those moments of like, what am I doing? Have I lost my mind? And Jonah would give me so much reassurance. So I got a lot of that. I got a lot of feedback without taking the journey away. Right. I had to move through why I was afraid and opening my heart and, those kinds of things. I didn't take the journey away. But for us, we're used to channeling. We know the difference. Like there have been times where we're in the kitchen and all of a sudden Jonah's there and Matt will be like, oh, I'm not talking to Joy anymore. Like he can feel the difference and then he'll ask questions.
And that's when Matt goes, so this Parmesan,
right?
What would you do?
Absolutely. You know us well.
Yes, exactly. Too much Parmesan? Yes. All right. So I have a handful of questions for Jonah. So let's bring in. Let me know.
Okay. Yeah, we're good.
So Jonah, welcome. What lessons from the fall of Atlantis can be applied in today's world?
So the experience of Atlantis, and when we look at Atlantis, Lemuria, and Egypt, and all of the players of that time, what we're discovering now is the next stage of awareness. So Lemuria, Atlantis, the confusion that happened during that time was that the masculine and the feminine energies needed to rise separately. So they needed to have their own space in order to expand. And so the coming together, the unification of those frequencies never clicked into place. It became a battle between what will lead this world, the masculine or the feminine. So as we come into this time, there's a harmonizing of frequency that's happening and an education throughout the world. What's energy? What's frequency? How do we work with frequency? How do we understand the nature of this reality? And in doing so, right now, the species is remembering that there was a time when it needed to be masculine or feminine and that didn't work. And the greatest lesson now is how do we integrate the masculine and the feminine within all species and then come together as a unified being in order to progress in a way that you didn't do before.
Now, was the Lemuria the feminine?
Correct.
and Atlantis was the masculine.
Correct.
And that was what was that? So what's happening in today's energy?
Yeah. So today's energy is a movement towards technology, where that technology is very much a masculine-driven outcome. How do we get to the outcomes faster? How do we get to the end? How do we get to the cookie without having to bake it, right? How do we just print it? How do we get to those places? And the feminine is nurturing the journey and nurturing the opening and the holding space for all of those things. So an integration of that is happening where the heart and the mind are working their way back together. But right now, there's going to be a little bit of the choosing of paths, choosing only the masculine and choosing only the feminine. So there are these different approaches, and you're seeing it now playing out as far as the decisions to police based on feelings and emotion. This is a rise of the feminine that's unchecked and out of balance. And then there's a rise of the masculine, which is it's only the technology, it's only the AI, it's only the output that matters, and only whether or not we have facts and deliberate information. And so emerging or marrying a union that's coming back to the marriage of mind and heart. They are not separate things. AI, heart, love, connection, people's well-being, all of these things can be integrated, and that path can be walked as one, realizing that technology isn't separate, emotions aren't separate. These are all part of a unified force in this world.
Will Atlantis show itself again in our lifetime? Or at least in my lifetime?
Yeah, not in the way that when you're seeing it already. So you're seeing a lot of that happening in ways that because you're in it, you don't realize there's a romanticization of these cultures, right? Mm-hmm. Where the romantic idea is they had all this technology, which means things were easy and there wasn't a lot of chaos. And there are stories that it was completely peaceful. That's not truthful. So the truth of that is there was a lot of violence and there was a lot of separating community. Atlantis wasn't by itself. There were other communities of beings. There were multiple beings. A lot of Atlantis was guided by beings that aren't here now, that you're not seeing now. And they had separated themselves from the bulk of humanity. So there was an isolation of what seemed like living in peace and harmony, which really was more of an elite community.
Now, did the people that came from Atlantis, once it fell, did they set up shop in Egypt, in Mesoamerica, in China, in multiple areas around the world?
Correct. They moved out. They systematically eliminated the leaders of those tribes, of those communities.
Really?
And took over those spaces and became the teachers and the rulers. Yes.
So they actually overtook them?
Correct.
It wasn't like, hey, come in and teach us and welcome back. And
there was an attempt for that.
Oh,
but it was also an attempt with a very large stick, right? A very large gun that shot lasers that they were unaware of. Didn't understand the technology. So they used technology as the dominance.
And when they did that, was the reasoning for it they understood the higher purpose of what they were doing? Meaning, like, when you're conquering another people, or at least taking a leader out and placing yourself in, it's generally not a good thing. Right. Generally not a good thing. But did they understand that, like, no, these people don't understand what they don't know?
Correct. Yeah, there was an idea that they weren't developed in a way where they could govern themselves, where they could step into civilization and understand the technology, understand what they were being shown or what was available to them. So in a lot of ways, it just was the path. It was what was going to happen. It just wasn't integrated. And because of the way cycles work on this planet, there was a desire to impart as much information about the technology and about what they had learned from the fall of these cultures and from the flood and different things that happened from the geography of the planet, the structures and all of the things that humans were going to navigate, and that they would be without leaders for 50,000 years. They needed to impart certain information very quickly, and they didn't have time for humans to evolve to a level of maturity. And so they hoped that they would take certain resources and information and be able to then grow consciously in a way that they wouldn't repeat those mistakes. And fortunately and unfortunately, there has been a repeating of some of those mistakes, but there's also been the implanted wisdom that hasn't been fully lost from that time.
When you say humans, you're talking about that the people from Atlantis were not human?
Correct.
So they came from where then?
So there was a variety of locations. There were 2 specific star systems that came together at that time that were cultivating the planet, that were a part of the planet. They were from this planet. They didn't conquer it. They came to cultivate this space, a space that they had lived before for eons and eons. And the human race was rising up in consciousness. So they were helping.
So then that's why Homo sapien overtook Neanderthal in a matter of a very short amount of time.
Correct.
Because they picked Homo sapien, because they were both.
Correct.
Because technically, Neanderthal was a much more better fit for this planet's environment.
But they would have been more violent.
Correct, because they were more animalistic.
Correct.
Than the Homo sapien.
Right. The Homo sapien had the capacity to have more of a balanced frequency and an ability to scale their consciousness in a much more rapid rate.
And did they? I mean, as the stories go with the Anunnaki. Is this the Anunnaki, essentially?
The Anunnaki were connected to this time. They weren't running Atlantis.
Right, of course. Yeah. But they were connected around this time.
Correct.
So was there sort of like this splicing of genes and manipulation to actually raise them up so fast? The humans?
Absolutely.
So that's why there's that junk DNA.
Yeah.
That we speak about.
And there was more than one occasion that occurred. Throughout history.
How long back are we talking? Atlantis was supposedly 10 to 12,000, 15,000 years when it fell.
Correct.
How far back did it go?
So that's accurate. It's just repeated itself many, many, many cycles. And so this is why there's a lot of confusion as people are channeling or you're looking at history, is this has been happening for more than 200,000 years. So it happens in a repeating cycle where the planet moves through a particular cycle and there's flooding, there's pole shifts, there are all these things that are occurring in order to sort of reset the Earth, in order to have it thrive and grow and expand. And as that happens, you lose a lot of information. and so it repeats, but each time it repeats with less of the trauma from the previous cycle.
Is this the highest we've ever been as far as our consciousness?
Not yet.
Not yet?
Not yet.
But we're moving.
You're moving in that direction. You have more people committed to the process of awakening than you have in previous times.
That's what I mean, yeah. As a collective, as humanity.
Yes.
There's never been a time where this many.
There's more agreement than there has been in the past.
Okay, so there was more agreement in past. As far as, you keep saying the word cycles, are you referring to like the yugas of this 24,000 year cycle that we start enlightened, go into dark ages, back to enlightenment in that sense?
Yeah, and the reason for that is you're moving into different parts of the solar system, and so different parts of the solar system have different frequency fields, right? Different frequency consciousness. And so as you move through those, it makes it difficult for your brain to retain information. So your brain needs to create personalities in order to help you remember things or save you from certain dangers so that you can program yourself. So there's certain times when you're so far from the core of your consciousness, from where you began, that the forgetting is so intense that you make up things in order to stay safe. So you make up stories and patterns. It's part of a protective mechanism that this suit has for you, this body has for you, in order to keep you safe while you're furthest away from your home.
So we're now moving towards
correct
our homes.
You're coming back to home.
We're coming back to home. So that's why it's going. And again, from our recorded history, we're talking about 6,000 years, 7,000 years, according, but there's actually it's much, much longer.
Yeah.
It's a blink.
Right.
That's nothing.
Right.
It really is nothing. In the last 100 years, it's accelerated so fast.
Yes.
Is that because why are we ramping so fast? Because the last 150 years, the technology, consciousness, we went from, even in my lifetime, in the 70s to where we are now, is so dramatically different.
Right.
But you see, not as dramatic as from the 20s to the 70s.
Right.
It was a dramatic difference, but not the same.
Right.
It seems to be ramping up. Why are we ramping up so fast? It seems like everything's changing daily now.
Right. So, you can understand it from the perspective of when you're near water, things grow faster. right? So the closer you are in proximity to water, the faster you grow, the more you can have. So you are now closer to what is the equivalent of water for consciousness. You're immersed in an experience that now information is more available. So in that field where you are, there's information floating through that was not available before. You couldn't pick up on the same intuitive information or channeled information. You were too far from its source. It's like a radio antenna that if you're out in the middle of the Antarctic, you might not pick up the radio station happening in Texas, right? It's just not proximity to that. The closer you move towards the proximity of consciousness, the faster your consciousness can grow and expand, the faster you can move through the cycles of awareness.
You mentioned the pole shifts. Mm-hmm. That is scientifically happened at one point or another in the history of the planet geologically. Mm-hmm. Is that going to happen in our lifetime in the next 100 years?
Yes.
The poles are going to shift. Yes. So if the poles are going to shift, that's going to change things a little bit. A little. So Antarctica will melt.
Correct.
And that continent will be and all of its secrets will then be revealed. Essentially, many of its secrets.
Yeah.
And then the areas that we looking at now would be frozen.
Yeah, not as precisely as I think some people have mapped that out. There's going to be a shift. You're going to move you're no longer going to be in the northern hemisphere. You'll be in the southern hemisphere. There are things that will happen, and the process of that transition will result in some of that temporary freezing condition. You'll have experiences of flooding. You'll have lots of earthquakes, volcanoes, all these things that are part of the discomfort of that birthing to that shift. Once it shifts, you'll actually be in an incredibly warm location. It's just getting through that transition. There's sort of there's a birthing process.
And I've heard this from others. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Is the thing that's going to start causing these pole shifts the comet that's coming towards us?
It's hard to say that one specific thing is responsible for that pole shift. The pole shift is part of the program. So
it's going to happen.
It's going to happen. It's just you start to have, just like when you look at signs, there are signs that it's occurring, and then you can make correlation, say, well, the comet's closer, so therefore it's causing it. Well, it's happening soon, and therefore you're starting to see the elements that are part of that process.
Will there will be a lot of destruction and death and things
Absolutely.
Like that because of this?
Absolutely.
Because most of the planet lives by the coasts.
Correct.
Essentially.
Yes.
So there's going to be some issues.
Yeah. And humans have lost, at least until this point, the ability to feel that intuitive knowing that humans are meant to migrate. And so humans have gotten attached because of the process of the fall and the consciousness shifting, that as you awaken, people become more migratory. They have a desire to travel. They feel this, I really just want to travel and see people. That's actually your migratory response beginning to come online, to wake up, to see that you are meant to move with the flow of I need to be here and I need to be there. And those who awaken to those traits, those who say yes to that awakening will begin to be moved around the globe and to those safe locations, and that you will move with the change, you won't be at the whim of it.
Okay, that makes sense. So let me ask you this then. The great ancient sites that we have around the world, and sites that are being discovered like Göbekli Tepe and these kind of places. For example, the pyramid, one of the most famous in the world. How old is it? How many years is it? Because they say, 3,000. It's not 3,000. No. From what now people are starting to figure out, that it could be as much as 10,000, 20,000 years old.
Older than that. So 22,000 plus years for a lot of those structures. Some of those structures were moved or were pieced together and moved to different locations. So you have things like the Sphinx, right? Yeah, there are certain structures that were shifted and changed. And you've seen that even in modern years, things that were moved from one place to another. That's happened many times, especially as you've known that things are going to change, to try to save some of that destruction, or at least save the model, right? Not all pyramids. Many of the pyramids are under the water water or underground.
Or jungle.
Right. It was like saving the model of, build it like this. This is what's going to bring that energetic freedom for you. Mm-hmm. This is what's this will help you communicate with other people as they're starting to come in. Mm-hmm. Right now you're amplifying the human body. You're going to amplify in other ways to be able to have conversations with other civilizations. So all of those things, it was trying to save that model so that when you knew what it was, you'd be able to replicate it easily.
That 12,000 years ago when Atlantis went down, was it the Younger Dryas? Was that the cause of it? There was some sort of cosmic comets hitting that changed the environment so rapidly that there was massive flooding? Because flooding,
absolutely,
is that what happened?
Absolutely, and a lot of that had to do with the magnetic shifting that's happening. So as soon as the planet shifts, it begins to shift again. It's always in shift. So there's nothing static. There's nothing static about the planet.
Illusion.
Right.
An illusion.
So you're moving constantly, and just like you would have tires on a vehicle, at some point as the rotation is moving those tires, you begin to break down the ball bearings and you begin to break down the vehicle, and so that it has to be realigned. And that's what keeps the planet functioning well. And so it's part of the process, the well-being process of the planet, is to do this. So if you're going too long in one direction, you begin to lose the field and you begin to lose certain aspects of the way that things regrow, and inevitably humans alter the waterways and they begin to change the structure of the planet. And so you need a system in place to say, let's realign.
And are there things that in the next coming years, are we going to start finding more and discovering more of these things? Well, waters are going to change.
Yes.
So things that have been underwater will start to pop up.
Those things will start to rise up, and you're actually going to notice in this time, people who have information about this time are going to begin to feel like it's getting too close to occurring, and the guilt of holding back the information is going to weigh heavily on them, and they're going to begin sharing it with the public. So there's going to be an incredible awakening within the groups of people who are keeping these in private, that keeping this information in private libraries. It won't be just a few people that get to see that. It'll start to seep its way out in a legitimate way, where you'll
science,
religion, and then it'll
yeah.
point to locations that people will begin digging there.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
All right. So my next question to you is, what does this fifth dimension upgrade that we're getting to?
Yeah.
We live in the third and fourth dimension now. This fifth dimension, the 5D, what is that exactly, and what is happening to us?
Yeah, there's a deeply technical response to that, but essentially from, our user perspective, the 5D is a way of perceiving reality. So it's a shift into consciousness where, we'll say simply, there was a moment when no one had cell phones and then everyone did. Right. So even in remote villages, people have cell phones.
Right.
Right. So that's a consciousness. We all are now aware we can communicate in this way. So this is the same thing that's happening with 5D, but it's happening at a much grander perspective. The ability for humanity to know itself and to be able to access a higher brain, if you will, an essential self, a soul self, a higher self. There's a lot of different words for this. That part of you is available. And you're operating from that rather than from a completely egoic structure. So you're able to not just be the witness sometimes or go into a meditative state or channel your higher self. You're actually living as your higher self in this body. So the ability to do that is unlocking. We would say this is probably the most important aspect of that shift. It's how you're seeing reality, or how much light is in this body. So this body is going through a transition of being able to receive that much light, which is your higher self. It's just more of you than what's currently in this body. So your body is going through a structural change to be able to have more of that frequency here. And so as you transition to that, there are a lot of bodies who have transitioned to primarily living from that state already. There's still some adjustments. Their health is compromised as a result of that. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to continue to go through this process, but you're not leaving and going to another dimension.
Yeah, right.
Right? It's the other dimension is coming into what you're experiencing here. Just like the second dimension didn't disappear because you're three-dimensional and aware of the third dimension and you're aware of the fourth dimension of time, the other dimensions didn't disappear. You're just operating from a knowledge of the third dimension. So that's all that will happen in this case. You're operating from a new knowledge, still the same world.
So it's kind of like coming up above the waterline when
Right.
you've only known underneath the
Correct.
waterline. And now you're seeing things from a completely
Yes.
different perspective.
Yes.
It's always been there.
Always.
Always been there.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about, there's this new awareness about the multiverse and parallel lives and things like that. Timelines, people choosing timelines and things like that. Can you shed a little bit of light for people on that's different multiple timelines? Is it true that every decision you make not every, but every major decision you make at least shifts you into a new timeline? There's literally infinite amounts of timelines. Like, what if Joy wouldn't have met Matt?
Right.
There's a Joy with that, and there's a Matt that did that,
Yeah.
and or they met too early. There's that and that. Is that kind of the way it works?
Well, so we wouldn't see it quite that same way.
Okay.
You can move your consciousness into any experience and change timelines, but what you're really doing is changing focus. Wherever your consciousness is focused is where you are. So all of your consciousness is here. It's not that you're replicating in a copy machine every time you shift timelines. You're taking all of you and all of your consciousness there. There are multiple dimensions, just like when you have a cell that replicates in your body, you have multiple cells that all began from the same cells. They're not the same cell. They don't have your consciousness, but you're connected in some way. So this is happening, but it's not happening in that same way every decision. There's a replication of this universe, and it's happening all the time. And that replication is now another group of cells that is now moving out and having experiences, and they resemble you, but they aren't you.
So is there a timeline where JFK wasn't assassinated? Or Martin Luther King wasn't assassinated, and there's things like that?
Not necessarily, no. There are certain milestone moments that are just occurring in every timeline.
That needs to happen.
That needs to happen. But there are certain aspects of it that he might have been wearing a different color tie. But there are certain moments that are always going to happen. It's just there are certain minute choices that might be different. But you're not replicating the same ideas. That universe gets to develop in its own way, where maybe JFK wasn't assassinated, but someone else was.
Right.
Right.
Or, yeah.
So the same experiences are unfolding. And so you could look at it from, well, in this one I chose this and then I chose this. It really is a collective choice in every multiverse. It's collective. It's not the individual choice that's making that happen. It's a collective experience that as this multiverse, as this new universe has replicated, everybody's making a collective choice about how they're going to move through that. And so you're not going to have like all of the infinite differences.
So is this kind of like the Mandela effect, where you, at one moment you're like, wait a minute, Ed McMahon did this,
Right.
Or no, they said this line in that movie, and there's a group of people who remember it one way and a group of people remember it the other way?
There's a merging of focus. This is a
Right.
merging of consciousness, where certain consciousness chooses to be in certain places, or certain spaces don't make it. So there's a lot of complexity to the conversation,
Yes,
right?
of course.
And there's always only one consciousness, and consciousness finds itself focused in the places that are going to evolve.
So then there would be like a moment where large groups of people decided, no, this is how this Saturday morning cartoon is supposed to be named, and another group decided, no, I think Fruit of the Loom logo doesn't have this this thing. Is that because it doesn't matter really.
Right.
These decisions don't.
Yeah, so some of these things are actual, some of these things are a merging of focus, and some of these things are just the way the brain works, that it's intended to forget things. So this is something that's not talked about a lot in a healthy human. Oftentimes a healthy human is perceived as someone who's able to memorize, because that's a high quality within the masculine-driven technology society, is what's your memory capacity? Do you remember things? But the truth of it is a very healthy brain forgets things and remembers things as they are. And so a lot of that is happening within humanity, is they remember things as they experience them. And because you fill in the gap with so many things, when you were in your height of developing your ego, you made up things in the image of your ego, things that you wanted them to be. And so there are certain ways that humans see things that aren't accurate. So both of those things are occurring. There is the legitimate things that are different for different people, and then some things were just different people had a different memory.
As you were discussing with the fifth dimension, that our awareness is, we're starting to become aware of it when you rise to a certain frequency. Is that what's happening with the veil in general?
Yeah.
Is that because people are like, there's a thinning of the veil now. There's information coming through. There's so many more channels.
Right.
There's so many more psychic mediums. I mean, I have to believe that throughout history, they've been burned, obviously, at the stake and things like that. But it's become so much more accepted, so much more out there. I alone have talked to over 100 myself of channels alone. So is that what's happening, that we're just, the veil is thinning, the code is starting in the matrix, starting to show itself a little bit more?
Yeah, well, it takes a collective, there's a lot of things that are at play with this particular question. Okay. One of the things that we think you're specifically pointing to is that when we're talking about the veil falling, humans are creating the veil. So you've created it yourselves. Mm-hmm. And when you're no longer collectively seeing the same things over and over again, you go to work, you expect to see the subway, you expect to see this. There are all these different aspects that you expect to see. When that begins to fall away, collectively, you start to unravel your ability just to create that predictive programming for yourself. And so then the veil starts to slip and you see behind it that there's a code here. I can participate in this. And you begin to become that participant with reality. So you're stepping into the participation, but at the same time, you creating ideas of what the world should be also falls away.
Interesting.
Right? And so there is no predetermined set of things when you walk out of your house anymore. There's far less than you thought there was anyway. Right.
It was all an illusion.
Right. So you're just seeing through all of that illusion and recognizing that, well, of course, there are structures and things that are shared beliefs that help keep this world moving. You don't want to drop that completely at this time, but really all of it is created through you all.
So this is a simulation.
Absolutely.
We are in a simulation.
Absolutely.
Not by some nerd.
It's not mechanical.
Not an alien nerd with a giant computer somewhere. Right. None of like that. But we are in a simulation.
It's a very intentional simulation.
And it's a simulation that we control, essentially.
Correct.
And the point of view that we're seeing is an agreement. You and I are agreeing that this is the room we're in right now.
Correct.
And that's the way it essentially works. And is it very much like a video game where in the video game, the entire world isn't rendered for the player when the player is playing in this room. Right. It only starts to render the moment it walks out of the room. Right. And like, now that world, and the world I just left is gone now. They're not rendering it because of the processing power. It would just take too much. You couldn't do it. Right. Is that something similar? Similar, except for there's a consciousness, there's an alchemy, right? Mm-hmm. You would call this alchemy. So there's a consciousness to the structures. And so they maintain a frozen form for a time. It can't hold forever, right? This is why you have an experience of things breaking down, or you have the obsolescence that occurs with something. This is happening because that structure can't hold its frozen shape without somebody. Right. And so you have to continue to put your focus back into it. That might be a remodel or a repair, right? But it's the focus comes back. But it will hold for a time. So as you put focus, if someone else were to come in here, they wouldn't need to know ahead of time what this set was supposed to look like. They'll see the structure that you designed in its frozen form. And do you have any parting messages for the audience? Our parting messages would be that all of you continue to come here in order to experience more of yourself from a loving space. And you're doing incredibly well. And all of the curiosity and questions you have are opening your heart. And if you could remember that it's not just about putting the information into the mind, but what does that mind do for the heart? And can you mind the heart more often than you're taking care of the mind? Can you bring that balance and harmony into that will actually accelerate your ability to understand this world faster? The information you're seeking will seek you as much as you're seeking it. And so we invite the curiosity, but we say bring it down into the heart and let the heart enjoy the journey with you. Thank you, Jonah. Yeah, thank you. And are you back? Yes. Always there. Always there. Do you remember everything? For a moment, I will.
and then it falls away.
It's like a dream.
Yeah.
Very dreamlike.
Yeah.
Joy, it was such a pleasure talking to you today.
Oh, you too.
Where can people find out more about you and the amazing work you're doing?
joyandjonah.com is a great place to go. And if you go there, there's incredible free resources. I have lots of video content on YouTube, so you can find me there as well.
Joy, it has been a pleasure and a joy speaking to you today. And thank you so much for coming to the studio and being with us this way. So I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to continue your journey, and don't forget to subscribe.